friends, the chanting the Namo Buddhaya, as I mentioned before, means homage to the Buddha. But especially when we're chanting it, as kind of a meditation, beginning of meditation, or beginning of Dhamma talks, it's referring to the wisdom of the Buddha, and the wisdom that everybody has with intrinsic wisdom within their own mind. And that state of pure Dhamma, pure awareness, the deathless state that's within each person's mind. And the Buddha himself has said many times that whoever sees the Buddha sees the Dhamma, and whoever sees the Dhamma sees the Buddha. So the Buddha and the Dhamma are basically not different things. So the Buddha doesn't refer to the physical body necessarily of the person, but it refers to the state of the awakened mind. Anyway, as we all know, the Buddha's teachings are centered around, the nature of suffering, and also the nature of happiness, but more specifically, the nature of suffering. Because suffering is very pervasive in people's lives, although people try to ignore it, and people are always trying to do things to be happy. Without understanding the causes of suffering, they go around trying to do everything to feel like they're happy, like indulge their senses and just to do whatever whim and fancy ideas come into their mind, and pursuing various hobbies and interests in order to keep busy and appear to be happy on the outside. But at the same time, without understanding the nature of suffering, they go on doing things that keep planting the seeds for more suffering and happiness to keep coming. So whatever types of pleasure or happiness that they might get through doing things or consuming things gets sort of negated by the suffering that also comes back as a reaction to those things. But I wanted to talk about the three levels of suffering, because really the whole of the teachings of the Dhamma, or especially from the Buddha, and meditation are about learning how to overcome and eradicate the causes of suffering. And on the most gross level, the immediate or intense type of suffering that comes back to us is generally associated with our karmic actions and the results of our actions, of the body especially. But of course, all actions come from the mind, really, as the Buddha mentioned in the Dhammapada. All actions are led by the mind. Mind is the master, mind is the maker. Act or speak with an impure mind, then suffering will follow. As the cartwheel follows the foot of the ox. And if one acts or speaks with a pure state of mind, then happiness will follow, as your shadow follows you around. And so, it's our actions of body, speech, and mind that we commit with an impure mind. Means a mind dominated by desire and greed, or selfish greed and desire, as well as anger and hatred and aversion, and ignorance, being driven by the ego, I, me, and mine, and trying to satisfy and get what that ego wants, and not understanding the truth. So we get all involved in the law of karma. And this comes back to us as, actual physical suffering, like we, do some unwholesome action to somebody and they, stick us with a knife or shoot us or beat us or cause us some physical types of sufferings. And then through our other types of actions, lying, cheating, stealing, sexual misconduct, people are coming, looking for us and getting revenge and causing us, physical sufferings of various types. And then the mental suffering that comes with that, of guilt, worry, remorse, and fear. So basically the suffering that comes through our karmic actions is, where the real grossest type of that comes from. People living in fear because they're going to get caught having told a lie or slept with somebody else's husband or wife or whatever, and all the other types of unwholesome actions. That's why the precepts, observing 5 precepts for the lay person is considered the starting point for overcoming or reducing the heavy forms of gross suffering by practicing sila. It means learning how to control one's actions of body, speech, and mind. Of course, the mind is the originator of all of our actions and speech, but the mind is harder to control and contain and train than the body. So even though our thoughts and impulses come from the mind, we can still forcibly restrain our body from actually doing an action. So that's why the practice of sila is considered the foundation of the meditative life, or at least in learning how to reduce the amount of problems that we have. And so, but practicing sila, it's due to the strong habits, through the course of evolution and samsara, the habits of kind of killing, stealing, lying, cheating, stealing, pillaging, plundering, satisfying one's gross greed and lust by even harming others. These are such strong habits that they're ingrained, and they're not easy to overcome. But the practice of sila is like putting the brakes on our actions. So you voluntarily observe the 5 precepts. I undertake the training rule. Again, as we've read them before, it's a training rule. We're training ourselves, training the physical body, but more importantly, training our mind. But as I just mentioned, it's easier to train the body than it is our mind, or to at least change the actions of the body. But sila, the practice of sila, is like having a policeman in your mind. It's sort of enforced behavior. So that if the street lights go out on a big intersection, and then the motorists, the street lights are out, then they'll just, take the occasion to speed or make illegal turns or so on. But if there's a policeman out there directing traffic, usually the people will obey, right? Why will they obey the policeman? Yeah, they're afraid of getting a ticket. So that's like a fear. Or, going to jail or something. So they're forcing themselves to obey. But if the policeman goes to lunch, the light's still out, what happens? Then, right? So that's the same way with our mind. Sila is like having a policeman in our mind. Every day you remind yourself, oh, I should refrain from lying, stealing, cheating, killing, sexual misconduct, intoxicating the mind. But you still like to do those things, but somehow you can force yourself not to do it. And so by at least not doing those unskillful actions, you can reduce the painful blowback or the painful consequences of those actions. Like, somebody insults you and you could see that urge to want to use some harsh speech. But then you reflect on that, no, I won't do that right now, because he might punch me in the nose if I do that. Or the problem will just get compounded. So you force yourself not to do it. Or you'd like to tell a little fib on your income tax report, to save a few bucks, right? So that urge to want to, maybe lie about how much income you got. But you remember, oh, I took the precept, that's kind of like a lying, right? Or even stealing. And so you force yourself not to, but you might still have liked to. So, but at least when you don't do it, you will be free from the actual consequences of the action. So that's where the practice of sila helps us to try to avoid those 5 major types of unskillful karma that constitutes basically most of the social ills in the world. Try to think of most of the social ills in the world. Are they connected with killing and physically harming people? Are they connected with stealing? Are they connected with lying, slandering, cheating? Are they connected with intoxicants? So you can see that really, almost every type of social ill and problem, or even in one's own personal life, as well as social life, is connected with people not following the precepts. In fact, it is said that if everybody could just follow the 5 precepts, live by the 5 precepts, there wouldn't be much need for Dhamma. It would be like a heaven on earth. I mean, sure, there would still be some types of suffering. The body gets sick and other problems, but still, in terms of the mental turmoil and the mental, anguish and worry, guilt, worry, remorse, and fear, that would be largely reduced. There's also the social conflicts. So why can't people just live by the 5 precepts? I mean, you'd think it'd be a no-brainer, right? Why is it so difficult? Because again, the impulses to break those precepts are deep within the unconscious mind, in the accumulation of greed, hatred, and ignorance. So the practice of sila, actually, there's 2 different, Bhante Gunaratana, he gives a nice definition of sila. He equates it with the word to seal. So to seal out the defilements. Put a seal over your actions, to seal them out. But there's another definition. The root word of sila comes from a word to cool, or sitala, which means cooling. So you can see it as cooling behavior. Sila is behavior that cools us down. Because most people are hot under the collar with greed, hatred, and delusion, and anger, and so on. And all their actions, so they're said to be hot, on fire. So to cool down, practice of sila cools those behaviors down. And but the practice of sila is not enough by itself. Again, as I mentioned, it can just prevent those grosser levels of the consequences of our actions, the grosser levels of suffering. But the causes of it is still in the mind. You still like to do those things. So there's always the danger that you will slip up and break the precept if your mindfulness is not very strong. It's like, if you were sitting and then a mosquito or fly, lands on you, and you can see that irritation in the mind. And you can see that initial impulse to want to, maybe slap it or kill it. And so you see that the hand starting to lift up, and at the last minute you remember the sila. Panati patta veramani. You can force yourself to not do it. But you would have liked to, right? So that's why the practice of sila, again, it's like a forced behavior, but it's not enough in itself to prevent the suffering arising, because the impulse is still in the mind. That's why the next level of practice is called the samadhi. So the practice of sila, is the practice of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And then the practice of samadhi means the development of meditation, developing mindfulness, concentration, and the right effort. So basically it means through the practice of meditation, you learn to calm the mind down. So, most of you have experienced, at least in meditation for short periods, when you gain some tranquility, and the mind becomes calm and is not so neurotic and squirming around, or you reach a state where the thoughts subside and you feel with a very nice light feeling. You feel very contented. And the last thing that would come into your mind is would want to be to jump up and go out and break some precept, because you reach a state where you're kind of like perfectly contented with the present moment. And so even the impulse for wanting to break a precept wouldn't arise at that time, while you're in that state of concentration or calmness. So those neurotic types of thoughts and emotions also sort of subside, and so you reach a deeper level of tranquility and freedom from suffering. But the practice of concentration, that means when if you just try to focus on one object, also that's sort of a forced calmness. Let's say you choose to focus on the tip of the nose, or some chanting a mantra as a form of concentration practice. And let's say you get some success at that. And then all the wandering thoughts and the hindrances subside, and you enter the state of, this tranquility. But it's through the force of the concentration that, always bringing your mind back, focus on the object. And it's sort of like pushing the head of a jack-in-the-box down into the box and putting the lid on. So putting the lid over the jack-in-the-box is like, through the power of that one-pointed concentration. But what happens when you take the lid off of the jack-in-the-box? Anybody have an idea? The head springs up, right? Sometimes with a lot of power, right? Boing! Why is that? Why is that? Come on, you know how to jack it up. Because, the spring is compacted underneath, waiting to be released. But because of the force of the lid, it stays down. And so in the same way, you can't stay in one-pointed concentration forever, or very long. And when you come out of the meditation, within a short period of time, that the head, which represents greed, hatred, and egotism, or ignorance, the I, comes back up again. So that even the practice of concentration or tranquility is not enough in the scheme of the Dhamma, in the scheme of purification of the mind. But it's very necessary to have that tranquility. But one has to go on to then cultivate the wisdom. That's why those 3 stages of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, which are the groups of the Eightfold Path, play its important role. But some people practice meditation just to develop, to gain tranquility. And through their practice, their mind calms down, and they reach a state of tranquility, and it's very nice and light. And but then they get complacent with that, and it's like, that's all I want. Just to sort of hang out in a tranquil mind for half an hour or 1 hour or so, and then you come out and you feel good for a while, but then very quickly you get caught up in a lot of the same old types of habits and lose your mindfulness. So that even the practice of concentration is not enough, because you can't stay in a concentrated state all the time. And that's where the development of Panya plays its important part. But, just as Sila is important, you can't gain really concentration without having some degree of practicing Sila, or restraining your actions. Because what prevents us from gaining concentration is the guilt, worry, remorse, and fear, and greedy and aversion thoughts that come in our mind when we're not restrained in our actions. And just allowing yourself to just do anything that comes into your mind at any time. So when you sit to meditate, those are the hindrances that even block you from gaining concentration. So the practice of wisdom is the practice of developing, the insight meditation. And wisdom has three levels to it. The intellectual wisdom, the wisdom that comes through reflection and contemplation, and then the wisdom that comes through the deep insights from the meditation, and especially the vipassana sort of style of insight meditation, whether when you're tuning in to and develop insight into anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And the insight meditation, that's what we've been been talking about in this last series of talks over the last few DOMs and retreats, the development of the right view, and purification of view, the purification of overcoming doubts, purification of the way, and those insight knowledges that I talked about yesterday. So first you gain an intellectual understanding, but then you have to go on contemplating that, whatever you read or heard, you have to then sit down and contemplate it, and think about it when you're in a more calm state. And then gradually, through enough practice of meditation, you get those deeper insights. So anyway, the focus of vipassana meditation is developing the insight into impermanence, the suffering, and no self. Through that process that I mentioned yesterday about understanding the mind and tuning in to the way the mind works, and understanding how the arising and vanishing nature of moments of our consciousness and thoughts, and eventually understanding how the ego is basically an illusion that's created within the mind, the sense of I being the owner of our experience. So, coming back to that analogy of the jack-in-the-box, in the insight meditation, rather than sort of blocking things out and just entering a state of deep tranquility where you're kind of unaware of things going on around you, absorbed in whatever object that you've been contemplating, Vipassana meditation opens up the field of awareness to probe down within the mind. So in concentration, basically, you're pushing the defilements. It's like there's a hand on your head pushing the defilements down and putting on the lid. So you're kind of forcibly pushing them down. So from the outside, pushing them down. Whereas in Vipassana meditation, you're going inside, down to the depths. And you're seeing how things work under the surface and making changes to the way the mind works from underneath, so that then those changes percolate from underneath, from the unconscious, percolate up and imbue the external features already with that understanding. So it's similar to, like, if you take a pair of wire cutters and you go down into the jack-in-the-box and you cut the wire part of the wire away. Let's say you cut 25% of the wire, the spring. Then when you take off the lid of the jack-in-the-box, what happens next time?
Less force.
Right, the head comes up with, let's say, 25% less power. And then later on you cut another 25% of the wire away. Then when you take the lid off, come out of the meditation, then what happens? Then again you have 25% less power. And then the third stage, another 25% of the wire is cut through. And finally, in the last stage, the last bit of the wire is cut through. And when you take the lid off the jack-in-the-box, then what happens? Nothing comes out. Right? Or the head, which represents greed, hatred, and delusion, doesn't come out because the power has been totally taken away from it. So that is really the function of the, the development of insight and wisdom. And specifically, it's through that process that I was talking about yesterday, developing the insight knowledges. And connected with those insight knowledges is also the four foundations of mindfulness and the 7 factors of enlightenment. These are all connected with that, those developing the insight knowledges. And that's why mindfulness of the body, the first foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of the body. And, if you've read that sutra, it starts with, sitting down and then developing the anapanasati, the mindfulness of breathing. That's to bring the attention into the body. Because normally the attention is floating around out there, just reacting to the external stimulus. So the mindfulness of breathing helps to bring the attention away from the external world to find the body, find the entrance to the nostrils, or to find the expanding and contracting of your abdomen or chest. But then when you have brought the attention to the body, then the Buddha had us actually go into the body. So instead of just staying only with the breathing, to go in to feel the 4 elements, the elemental vibrations of earth, fire, water, air, hardness, solidity, fluidity. But basically it means the vibrations produced by cellular interaction and so on. As we mentioned yesterday, that meditation I was guiding you through this morning, trying to have you feel this, the body is just a mass of vibrations. So you're going deeper into the body. To where the sensations are arising. So the second foundation of mindfulness is the mindfulness of feelings. How these feelings, pleasant, painful, and neutral feelings, are affecting us, and how we get trapped by them. And specifically how the suffering arises because we become addicted to those and basically become like a slave to those feelings and sensations, a slave to the pleasurable feelings, wanting to go after them and hang on to them and fight and kill anybody who tries to prevent our getting those pleasurable feelings. And the same with the painful feelings, to get away from the painful feelings. And basically, you see how it's a program. These feelings are just feelings. And but we've allowed ourselves, through the wrong understanding of it, to become basically addicted to those feelings. And people are basically addicted to painful feelings too. They want to get away from them. Usually you think, the addiction is for the pleasurable feelings, but people are addicted to the painful feelings, meaning, you want to get rid of it. Any slightest little discomfort, you want to get rid of it. So it's also an addiction, means you're paying too much attention to it. And just let it be there. You see how it lasts a few seconds, maybe longer. It goes away by itself. You don't have to waste energy trying to get rid of it, because it will change in many cases, or go away, or if you stop paying attention to it. But anyway, so when you're paying attention to the feelings, then all of our thoughts and emotions and reactions are due to these feelings. And so therefore you'll be able to see the intentions. That's why I mentioned in this morning, when we were doing walking meditation, to try to see the intention before you actually lift the foot up off the ground or swing it forward. Anybody think they could kind of sense that intention? That the body's not going to move unless there is some kind of a will or an intention to do it. But in many cases it's very subtle. So in our normal life we never see those intentions because we move too quickly. But the intention is where the karma arises. And that's why people keep breaking the precepts, because their attention is not at that level of intention. So there has to be attention to intention. Because when we see the intention, then there's a brief moment or two where we can see that this intention is something that's going to bring me suffering later. Let me drop it. And then you don't follow through the intention. So that's how the foundations of mindfulness of the breathing helps you to get centered in the body. Becoming centered in the body allows you to get in direct touch with the level of feeling and sensation. By staying with feeling and sensation, you naturally see the thoughts and intentions that are arising, generated by those feelings. And while you're doing that, you're developing the factors of enlightenment. The factors of enlightenment. The first one is the mindfulness. So the mindfulness is the ability to observe, to be aware of whatever is occurring, through the body and mind. So you're aware of these. You're aware of a painful feeling is arising now. A pleasant feeling is arising now. An intention is arising now. A desire or aversion is arising now. So the ability to note from moment to moment and tune in to that moment to moment coming and going of the various sense stimulus, that is, let's say, the advanced level of mindfulness. And actually there's, mindfulness is often used as synonymous with vipassana meditation. But mindfulness, in vipassana there's also mindfulness, but in vipassana meditation is a more advanced level of mindfulness. So ordinary mindfulness, you can be mindful, oh, you know, I have a pain here, or mindful of a thought, but it's not necessarily that high degree of concentrated mindfulness that actually sees the arising and vanishing of things. So, I have a little formula that mindfulness plus concentration equals vipassana. So just ordinary mindfulness is not vipassana. And vipassana, according to the way the Buddha defined it, and if you've read the texts and so on, then you understand this, that you know, vipassana starts when you actually start seeing impermanence, which means seeing how quickly things arise and vanish from moment to moment. And so that entails some degree of concentration. But through practicing mindfulness, you become concentrated. And that concentration then boosts that mindfulness up, like putting high-octane gasoline in your gas tank. It's like boosting that high-octane mindfulness. It becomes very, very crystal clear and sharp to see the subtler and subtler sensations that are coming and going in the body and mind. So that's how that you know, the concentration is necessary to you know, bring that level of mindfulness up to the point of practicing vipassana, or seeing reality as it is. So the first foundation of the first factor of enlightenment is the mindfulness, so the ability to see things arising and passing away from moment to moment. And then investigation of Dhamma, the second factor of enlightenment. You investigate what is the meaning of this. So you investigate the body. What is this body? What are these four elements? How do they arise? How do they interconnect? What are these five aggregates? The investigation of Dhamma coincides with the contemplation of Dhamma, or the fourth foundation of mindfulness. Is you know, the groups of the five hindrances. So you become aware of the five hindrances, and you understand this is sense desire. How does sense desire arise? How does it continue? How does it cease? How does ill will arise? How does it continue? How does it cease? Why does sloth and torpor arise? How does it continue? How does it cease? And the same with the other hindrances. And then the five aggregates. This is form. This is the arising of form, continuation of form, the cessation of form. This is the arising of feeling, the continuation of feeling, the cessation of feeling. And the same with perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. So in that contemplation of Dhamma is you're investigating, you're using your intelligence to observe and understand how things are working. Just as a scientist would understand. Now if you give an ordinary person a microscope and you tell him to look underneath this microscope, but he's had no training in biology or cell biology, when he looks in there, there's nothing going to make sense, right? He may see a lot of things, but his mind can't put two together and realize that this thing is eating that thing, and this is causing that, and coming up to some hypothesis or conclusion. So in the same way, with the intellectual understanding that we get, when we understand intellectually something about the five aggregates, and then when we look under the microscope, then we can actually see that because of form, the interaction of form, feeling arises. Because of the grasping of feeling, then thoughts arise. Thoughts give rise to our intentions. Intentions gives rise to the karmic actions. And then suffering arises as a result of the karmic actions. So you see how that whole process is like that, by observing it. That is the investigation. So you investigate, you wonder, this is suffering. This is the cause of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering, as you're observing it in the mind. But it entails, having that, investigation of Dhamma. A lot of people don't want to investigate. They say, just, give me some white light, give me some feel-good sensation, and they kind of just hang out like this, for a couple of hours, some type of samadhi, but they don't want to investigate. And so, it may be all right, but, it usually doesn't lead to much deeper than that. So the investigation requires a more active, focusing the attention especially on the characteristics of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And again, it's about outfoxing Mara, or ignorance. We talked about this, I think, yesterday. Ignorance and wisdom. That ignorance has been ruling our mind, since, for a long time. And in Buddhist terminology, we call that the Mara. So the equivalent in Christian language might be something like the devil. The devil made me do it, right? So we would say the Mara made me do it. That means ignorance, not a person. It's just the ignorance in our mind, not understanding the truth, caught in our habits, has made us do these various unskillful things. Because they've tricked us. They've duped us into believing things are real and permanent, and the ego is real, and this world was made for me to enjoy, and to hell with anybody else. It's just a very generalized kind of idea, but nevertheless it's there in a lot of people's minds, or at least in their behaviors. Maybe not, they wouldn't say it outright verbally, but the way that they lead their life. So that's why the investigation of the Dhamma is very important, and especially investigating it in terms of anicca, dukkha, and anatta, because it's about the overcoming of the causes of suffering. And that's why those insight knowledges that I explained yesterday was that way of, investigating them, and seeing them as, seeing how they rise and fall, and seeing the danger of them, and then developing the desire for deliverance, detachment, desire for deliverance, and so on. So it's a very specific type of training. But anyway, so the four foundations of mindfulness and the seven factors of enlightenment. So, and through the investigation of the Dhamma, through the investigation as you're trying to understand everything that's occurring in your body and mind, what is this thought? What's causing this anger to arise? What's causing this sensual desire to arise? What's causing this sadness to arise? And you investigate. And then if you see the cause, then you determine to try to eliminate the cause. A lot of people, they see the cause, but they don't want to try to eliminate it. It's too much work. So I know smoking's bad, but give me that cigarette. Or whatever else it might be, So to change oneself is more difficult than to following the status quo. That's why fewer people tend to want to change themselves. Anyway, so the investigation gives you energy. Because as you investigate, you see that that's the truth about the mind. And you're seeing new things around every corner. It's like you're discovering something new, a subtler sensation, a subtler interaction, a subtler perception. You start to understand anicca, dukkha, anatta at progressively deeper levels. And that gives you a lot of energy and also makes you happy. Because you're actually starting to see something from a deep level. And so the investigation gives rise to the energy. It's like a scientist getting close to the end of his experiment, to find a cure for some disease. So he might stay up, days and night, even going without food, because his mind is so absorbed in wanting to come to the conclusion of that. So it's the same way people could go on meditating for hours and hours and hours when their mindfulness and awareness is very strong, because they're seeing new and new things, and they keep probing, to challenge that pain to come up, challenge those itches, and come on, let's see if you can disturb me. That's what the Buddha did on the night of his enlightenment. If you read the story about the night of Buddha's enlightenment, where Mara came to him. And first there was a big thunderstorm. Mara created a thunderstorm to try to scare the Buddha off his meditation seat. When that didn't work, then he sent the four, dancing girls, desire and raga and lust, to try to tempt him to get out of this. But it was all in his mind, of course. And all these demons coming at him and try to scare him. But the Buddha saw it all as an illusion. But he challenged them to come on. Throw something, give me something new, throw it at me. The challenge is equanimity and mindfulness. So that's the kind of courage and attitude that we should have when we sit to meditate. No more pain in here. Giving in to the various types of distractions or excuses why you should, get up early or whatever. So that energy, and that leads to joy. It's hard to understand that for the average person. How can you get joy out of doing that? It's not like a morbid, masochistic stuff, right? If you try to explain this to an ordinary person, they can't understand. So. But that joy then leads to tranquility. And the body and mind becomes tranquil. And that's where you get piti and sukha arise. So it's a very concentrated state. You get jhana factors. Even through the practice of 7 factors of enlightenment, jhana factors arise in terms of piti and sukha. And the mind is totally concentrated in the present moment. And why the next stage is concentration. So concentration, and that means jhanic concentration. The same strength of jhanic concentration, because the hindrances are all subsided at that point, and the mind is boom, right there with every moment course, not distracted, and feeling this joy and happiness too. Or inner illumination. And that leads to equanimity. It's called sankhara upekkha. The mind is no longer being attracted to any type of sensory stimulation or even pain and so And with that, correspondingly, the sense of the I fades away, is getting weaker and weaker and weaker, like receding back into the unconscious, the sense of I. Now, in the beginning, with mindfulness investigation, the I might have been there and you've been excited, but then when you reach those levels of concentration and equanimity, that sense of I is faded away. And if you can hold that and maintain that long enough, then that is when this change of lineage and conformity knowledge, change of lineage occurs, as I was trying to explain yesterday. So all these things, the four foundations, the seven factors of enlightenment, they're all very intimately integrated, and they form a kind of a package along with these various, the insight knowledges and so on. So this is part of the development of understanding the Dhamma. Is you have to try to see how all the different aspects of the Dhamma teachings, they all fit together in a kind of a very clear, coherent package. But it takes some study to really to see that. And then you see how profound the teachings of the Buddha are, in that way that he devised a method for learning how to penetrate this whole mass of delusion, and the whole mass of suffering, because he had that clear understanding of the mind. So again, this methods of the four foundations of mindfulness, developing the factors of enlightenment, the insight knowledges, these are all ways of a kind of tricking the mind out of itself, or outfoxing Mara. And the development of wisdom in order to eradicate the ignorance that has been dominating our minds for the whole time. So, anyway, to come back on this, so the practice of Dhamma in the daily life is basically practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, the right view, right thought, right speech, right action. All these 8 factors of the Eightfold Path are contained within those 3 groups of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, or skillful conduct, calming, and insight. So, if your meditation practice isn't going as well as you want, you always have to keep coming back and checking up what you're doing, if it accords with, let's say, the practice of Sila, or the other, guidelines of the Eightfold Path, but especially Sila, and you can see ways of maybe, working on tightening up that Sila. Because you can understand in your mind what kind of defilements are there through your mindfulness. And there's always a cause for them. They don't come out of nowhere or come out of nothing. And so it's always, through your practice of mindfulness, you can see what your blocks are, and then to investigate and try to make changes in whatever in your lifestyle that's you see that's contributing to those types of blocks and so on. Means, if you want to make progress, steady progress. So